A gute Woche. Before we go into today's Farbrengen, first let us mention the matters which the Rebbe brought to our attention, the herois which are negei l'poil. In fact, it was at the end of the Farbrengen where the Rebbe brought to our attention on the concept of makil kehilos b'Shabbos, to see to it that on Shabbos we congregate Yidden, we bring together Yidden, and we teach them Torah. And in those places where this is done already, it should be increased and be done on a yet greater level, on a deeper scale. And those places where this is not done yet, this should be introduced, to be makil kehilos b'Shabbos. The Rebbe also spoke about the importance of tzedakah. Even on Shabbos, when we cannot give tzedakah, in terms of money, financial tzedakah. However, there's another area of tzedakah, and that is when we say a good word to a Jew, and we have no imagination how much this good word is meaningful to a person, and how much this helps a person, and how much this uplifts the person. And therefore, this is a type of tzedakah which we can do not only during the week. This type of tzedakah could be done during Shabbos as well. The Rebbe began the Farbrengen that we are on Shabbos Chazak, because today we finished Chumash Bereishis, and it was the Chazak on Chumash Bereishis, which is the first sefer of the 5 Chumashim. And when we say something is first, it means not only is it first in number first, but why is it first in numbers? Because it has a specialty to it. It is first in quality. And as we find, the Minig Yisrael is that when we proclaim Chazak in Shul, we don't say it once, we say it 3 times. Chazak, Chazak, v'nischazek. In other words, it becomes a chazaka. If something is done 3 times, we know the halachic concept that it becomes a chazaka, it becomes a practice. And the same here, we are emphasizing 3 times how we have to strengthen ourselves, and especially this year. That this year began in a way that we had the concept of 3 days, 3 days of Kedusha right from the beginning of the year. We had it that way, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, and it was followed by a Shabbos. We had the same, the 2 days of Sukkot, and it was followed by a Shabbos, and the same with the last 2 days of Sukkot. And being that this was so at the beginning of the year, this has an effect on the entire year, that the entire year should be such as it is known. Sometimes we put emphasis on the siyum, on the conclusion. Sometimes we put emphasis on the beginning. And the beginning here was right away with a matter of chazaka. 3 times. Especially when we conclude Sefer Bereishis. Sefer Bereishis has another name to it. It is called Sefer HaYoshor, because it tells us all about the righteous ones, which are the Aves. And what does Sefer Bereishis conclude with? It concludes with the life of Yaakov. Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov was the most chosen one of the Aves. And we learn about here in Parshas Vayechi how towards the end of Yaakov's life, Yaakov expressed his desire to be buried in the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, which that is where Yitzchak and Avraham are buried, until Adam Arishon and Chava, which they too are buried there. And these matters of Torah really have a shaykhs to each and every Yid. As we say, Torah tziva lonu Moshe meirosha kehilas Yaakov, that anyone who is only a member in Kehilas Yaakov has his relationship to Torah. And here it is emphasized that Torah is an inheritance. And we say that one inherits something. When one inherits something from his predecessors, there is no need for the one who is inheriting to possess any type of qualifications. And it is of no difference what type of qualifications he possesses. The mere fact that he's worthy of inheriting, this is the only credential he needs so that he should be able to inherit. And the same thing is when we're talking about Torah. Torah is called a meirosha. It is an inheritance because it relates to each and every Yid. And in fact, the Minig Yisrael is that we refer to this Seder not by the title of Vayechi Yaakov, but we refer to the Seder Vayechi, meaning that all matters of a Yid, all matters of Torah mitzvahs have to be done with a chayis, with a lebedikait. And this chayis has to be in a format of a chazakah, as we just brought out. Chazakah meaning when something becomes a practice, it is done that way. It is always done that way. And then what happens is, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, even when a Yid is in a level of Mitzrayim, meaning even he is in Golis. And in fact, the last word of the Sedra is also Mitzrayim, meaning that on all types of limitations which a person may fall into, even when he is in Golis, because all Golisen have the title of Mitzrayim. And in all of his matters, he is serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a format of Vayechi, with Lebedikait. And then what happens is, as the Pasuk says at the end of the Sedra, Vayisem ba'orin b'Mitzrayim, the Pasuk is talking about Yosef, and Yosef was placed in an oren, Yosef was placed in a coffin. What does this mean spiritually to us? Just like a coffin protects from all sides. The same thing here, even when a Yid is in Golis, and when a Yid is serving the Rebishter, in the format of Vayechi, he's protected from all sides, that no one can hurt him. And in fact, the protection is even done by others, just like we find the pasuk Vayisem ba'oren b'Mitzrayim. Others put Yosef into the oren. The same thing when we're talking about every Yid. He's protected from any kind of undesirable inyanim, that he should not be hurt by it. And everything is in the way of Yaakov. So we find, Chazal tell us, Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Yaakov Avinu did not die. And Chazal explain it. Famous Gemara Masechta Tainis, Ma zaroi b'chayim, afhu b'chayim. What is the indication that Yaakov is alive? It's dependent on his children. If his children are alive, that means afhu, so is he, so is Yaakov b'chayim. And when we're talking about Yaakov, it means Yaakov is composed of the word Yud Ekev. What does that mean? That Yid in his avodah and his way of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes the Yud. The Yud refers to godliness, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this Yud permeates him in all levels until it reaches his Ekev, until it reaches his heel. And this also has a shayches to Sidareinu, as the Rebbe says to the Friedike Rebbe, whose name was Yosef Yitzchak, which both of his names begin with letter Yud. Which both names really have a shayches to the concept of Geula. As the pasuk says, Yosef Adnai Shenis Yodai, the Rebbe will take us out of Golis. And then the second name, which begins with Yitzchak, which is Yitzchak, and also begins with a Yud, and this relates to the pasuk Kol Hashemeya Yitzchak li. Anybody, because that is why Yitzchak was named so. Anybody that hears about it, it will bring to laughter. What does that mean? It will bring to simcha. And as the Rebbe emphasizes, even one, we know Chassidus brings out that there are two levels. There's a level of shmiya, when one hears something, and there's a level of re'iyah, which is vision. Here we say kol hashemeya, even though he did not reach the higher level of vision, he did not reach to the level of re'iyah, nonetheless, he too will be affected by it, and will be Yitzchak li. And all of this will be in the way, especially the way it's suitable for the month of Tevis, which regarding the month of Tevis, the Gemara tells us that this is a month when Guf enjoys from Guf. And as it's explained in Chassidus, what do we mean by Guf? There are two types of Gufs. There's the Yesh HaNivra, the Guf, the created Guf, and then there is the true Yesh, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And meaning these two Gufs bring enjoyment one to another. Until to the extent that even in all countries where there's a need for rain, as we have asked from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Shmini Atzeres, the Rebbe should give us rain. We have Milm Oizgebeten, as the Rebbe expressed himself. In other words, this tefillah was accepted in all countries, and especially in Eretz HaKodesh, where the pasuk uses the expression, it's a land that the Rebbe is constantly guarding Eretz Yisrael. So there too there will be the rain that it is needed. And when we're talking about the word Guf, this also relates to Geula, talking about Guf, because this has a shaykhs to the month of Tevis. Chazal tell us that when will Mashiach come, when all neshamas that are in the Guf will be coming out of the Guf. And as it's explained, the source of neshamas, the Eitzar neshamas, The safe where the neshamas are contained l'mayla is called guf, and all neshamas have to come out of there, and that will lead to to Geula. And then we will have excuse me. Then we will have the Vayisem ba'orin. But what oren are we talking about? The oren that has the Shnei Luchis Abris. And what do we find by the Luchis? The Luchis, everything on the Luchis was engraved. What is the inyan of an engraving? The inyan of engraving is that, discussed already many times, and it's explained in the Chassidus, that is when the writing, the letters that are on the stone or whatever object we use, that it was engraved on. And the object that it was engraved on, the letters and the object are totally one. In other words, it is not two separate inyanim. The same thing when we're talking about the relationship from a Yid to Torah. His relationship is such, not that he is one inyan and Torah something else. He is totally united with Torah. And as the pasuk says, Im bechu koisai teileichu. And Chassidus teaches Im bechu koisai, meaning that when we look at Torah in a way of chakika, it is engraved within us. In other words, it is totally united with us. And then it is teileichu. We will go. We will not stand at one place, but we will constantly go higher and higher from one level to another. And as we also find in Pashas bechu koisai, pasuk using the expression v'oilech eschem koimemius. The Rebbe will take us in a way that our heads will be uplifted, which this is an indication of Geula, and will be Zeicha to Geula. And Geula is only dependent on Tshuva, and Tshuva is something which could be done instantly. As the Psak Halacha is. As the Psak Halacha, if somebody is Mekadesh a woman, Al Menash Shani Tzadi Gomo, on the condition that he is a tzaddik gomer. So the halacha is that even though we know that he's not a tzaddik gomer, but could be that he had thoughts of tshuva while he said it, and therefore halacha tells us that she is questionable mikudeshes. Why questionable? Because we don't know what his thoughts were. But would we know for sure what his thoughts were? Would we know that he definitely had thoughts of tshuva, hirur tshuva? Then she would be definitely mikudeshes without any question. What does this show us? This shows us that as it is in halacha, tshuva is something which could be done instantly. And through this we are zeicha to the Geula Hamitis Vashlema. Later in the second sicha, and as well as the third sicha, the Rebbe continued on a subject which the Rebbe actually spoke about it Thursday, Asara B'Teves, the Rebbe referred to it as well. We will give a brief introduction. In these sichas, the Rebbe is bringing out the greatness of a Yid, and how dear and precious each and every Yid is by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And obviously this is coming as a response from the Rebbe. The Rebbe usually, as we know, speaks without mentioning names. But it seems like somebody in Eretz Yisrael spoke recently, where he brings out some extremely derogatory comments about the Holocaust, about those Yidden who got killed al Kiddush Hashem, Yidden who are called Kiddushim, and as we say in davening every Shabbos, Nikmas dam avodecho hashafach. Any Yid which was killed al Kiddush Hashem gains the title that he is a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And nonetheless, somebody brought out recently some extremely derogatory comments about those Yidden, about the 6 million Jews that were taken away from us in the Holocaust. And these sichas, which the Rebbe spoke yesterday, as well as the sicha, which the Rebbe spoke Thursday afternoon, the Rebbe spoke it with an unusual koch. And it is noticeable the way the Rebbe spoke, the tremendous pain and agmas nefesh, which was caused by these words. And we will relate a little bit of it. We mentioned earlier what Chazal tell us, Yankov Avinu loy meis, that Yankov Avinu did not die. And as the Gemara goes on to say, Ma zaroi b'chayim, afhu b'chayim, just like his children are alive, so is he alive. Actually, if we look into the psukim, where the Torah describes the ptira, the passing away of Yaakov, we will notice that there's a major difference of when the Torah relates the passing away of Avram and Yitzchak, and as to when the Torah relates the passing of Yaakov. Regarding Yaakov, the word Misa, death, is not mentioned in the Torah. And nonetheless, the Torah only says Vayigva, but not Vayomos. And nonetheless, where do we find, on what basis do our Chachamim bring out the fact that Yaakov did not pass away, Yaakov did not die? All of this is dependent on the attitude of Zaroi, on the attitude of Yaakov's children. And this gives us to understand that if we want to know what is doing with Yaakov, we look at what is doing with his children. And the fact that when his children are alive, this is an indication that Yaakov is also alive. And therefore we can understand that Rachmana litzlan, when one comes and says that there are differences between generations, there are generations that are considered proper generations, zakoyim, justified generations, and there are other generations which are the contrary to that. In other words, he will make a difference between the Dor that was worthy to enter Eretz Yisrael, the Dor that entered Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Yeshua ben Nun, and they entered Eretz Yisrael together with the Aron and the Luchais, which had the Koyanim and the Chatzotzrais, and when they surrounded Yericho, the wall of Yericho fell, and then they were able to continue and conquer Eretz Yisrael. And as we know, that conquering and settling in Eretz Yisrael was a process which lasted for 14 years. 7 years to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and 7 years to divide Eretz Yisrael. But when we are talking about the Geula HaAmitis VaHashleima, the Geula which will come, which we are awaiting through Mashiach, then it will not take no 14 years to settle, no 7 years to settle, not even 7 hours. The word shah, an hour, can also be interpreted as shah, a turn. A turn. There's a famous Chassidish taich based on the Chazal, Yofe shah achas b'tshuva ma'asim tovim ba'olam hazeh, that 1 hour in this world of tshuva and ma'asim tovim is more worth than all Chayei Olam Haba. And the Chassidus teaches that Shah does not only mean an hour, it means one move. One move in the right direction is something which cannot be estimated how valuable that is. So here we say it will not even take 7 turns until we will be settled in Eretz Yisrael. But this Geula will come in a way of B'shaita Chode Uberige Chode. Instantly, the Rebishter will take us out of Goles and will put us into a position of Geula. The transfer between Goles and Geula will be something which will go right away, immediately. And therefore, when there are those that Rachmana litzlan are bringing out differences between generations, and they are saying that our generation is not a worthy generation, Rachmana litzlan, this is the opposite of the belief in Teiras Moshe. Because when Teiras Moshe says that Yaakov Avinu loy meis, because of the fact that Zarei b'chaim, and when he wants to say that there is one moment that the attitude of Zarei b'chaim is interrupted. In other words, what means Zarei b'chaim? When Yidden are alive and their involvement in Torah and mitzvahs, and he wants to say that this is a generation where this is interrupted, this Rachmana litzlan, hoyoi lo yisehi, it should not happen, is the same as saying that Yaakov Avinu is not alive. And when we're talking about Yidden, it means each and every Yid, because each and every Yid is a son or a daughter of Yaakov. And Rachmana litzlan for such a thought, and how much more so to talk that way, and how much more so to publicize such type of ideas. And especially when he's inquiring by his own students, who he is responsible to train them in the path of Torah and mitzvahs. So he's inquiring by them, is it already publicized, this thought which he brought out? Let us hope, says the Rebbe, that publicizing this negative concept will be just like the Megillah which is written by Yesoita. When a Megillah is written by Yesoita, even though it's also written in big letters and so forth, but nonetheless the ultimate goal of it is that it should be erased. And once it is erased, then it brings to bracha, to the extent that if this woman for whom the Megillah Soita was written was until now giving birth with hardships and problems, now she will give birth easily without any problems. Which this also relates to the Gula HaSida. The Gula HaSida is also an Indian of a Leida, of giving birth. It's brought in Chassidus and in Kabbalah that Golus is compared to Ibur, to a period of pregnancy. And when will the Leida be? That will be at the time of Geula. And if he's asked, as the Gemara uses the expression, weren't there Hespedim said when Yankiv said? So he responds, I don't know from any Sabdonim, and I don't know from any Kavronim, I don't know from no Kunzen, and from no Pshetlach, meaning I don't know from no tricks, and from no types of interpretations. All I know is that there's an open pasuk. And Mikra Ani Doirish, as Chazal used the expression. And in this pasuk, we find how Yaakov is compared to his children. And just like his children are alive, so is he b'chayim. And when we say something is brought out in an open pasuk, that is something which one cannot even have an error in. Because we know that the halacha is that we do not bring a par helim dover shel tzibur, that is a korban, when something is forgotten. Halacha is forgotten. And the Torah tells us then we have to bring a korban. However, something which stems from an error on an open pasuk, then we don't even bring such a korban. Especially taking in consideration the psak din of the Rambam, that the real and true desire of a Yid is to fulfill the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to stay away from Averas. Sometimes we fall through. It's because we were forced by the Yetzirah. And we know that when one is forced, oines, rachmana patre, and especially in light of the psak din which we just brought out earlier, that when one is mekadesh as isha on the condition that he's a tzaddik, or even when he adds on tzaddik gomor, as the version is in many poskim, still she is doubt. There is a concept of kedushin, a doubted kedushin, but as we brought out earlier, what is the doubt? The doubt is because we are not definite what his thoughts were. However, had we been confident what his thoughts were, then his kedushin would not be a kedushei safek, then it would be kedushei vadai. And especially when we're talking about a generation, where the people in this generation are the sons of daughters of the people in the generation of the previous generation, where they gave up their lives al Kiddush Hashem, as it is known. Famous story about the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and his Shulchan Aruch was accepted by all of Klal Yisrael. Together with the tablecloth on the Shulchan Aruch, there's a Shulchan, and then there's a cloth on the Shulchan. The mappa, the cloth on the Shulchan, that is the addition which the Ramah added on. As we know, the remes for the Ramah and the pasuk of Nei Yisrael Yoitzim biyad Roma, and it's explained that this is an indication to the Ramah. The Ramah is spelled with a hey and the Ramah is spelled with an aleph. So it is known that the Beis Yosef, all his years, had a desire to merit to give his life on Kiddush Hashem, but he was told by the Maggid that for whatever reason he wasn't zeicher to do that, but he was given something which is secondary to giving up his life al Kiddush Hashem, and that is the fact that he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. So from here we can derive how great is the inyan when a person gives up his life for Kiddush Hashem. And we're talking about children of people whose parents perished in the Holocaust, which means they gave up their lives on Kiddush Hashem. And especially after it is known the famous expression of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that our buttons are also shining, and we are ready for the coming of Mashiach, as we stress every day in davening, V'sechzeno einenu b'shuv chalotziyim berachamim. And we said it already today also. And right now from Parshas Vayechi, we will be entering into Parshas Shmos. And Parshas Shmos discusses Geula, as the Medrash tells us. Reuven v'Shimon nachsen, they went into Mitzrayim as Reuven v'Shimon, and Reuven v'Shimon salkin, they're going out of Mitzrayim as Reuven v'Shimon. And from the Gilui of Parshas Shmos, we come to the Gilui in Parshas Ve'era, which Ve'era begins with Ve'era la'ovis, that the Rebbe makes himself seen, reveals himself to the others as well as to the children. Even though when the Rebbe brought out this pasuk to Moshe Rabbeinu, it was in a tone of complaint, the idea of Ve'era la'ovis. However, now, after all the Avodah which the Yidden have done throughout all these years of Galus, now we are meriting the Ve'era that the Rebbe makes himself seen to the fathers and to the children. And especially how we're stressing now that Yankov Avinu loy meis. And why loy meis? Because ma zaroi b'chayim af hu b'chayim. And each and every Yid has a spark of the neshama of Yankov Avinu, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Igeras HaKodesh. And that is why every Yid is called Nasi, which abbreviates Nitzutzoi shel Yankov Avinu, a spark of Yankov Avinu. And all of this leads to the coming of Mashiach, when we will have the revelation of Avdi David Nosi Aleim Liyolam. And Geula will affect each and every one of us, the old and the young, our sons and our daughters, and all together we will go to the Eretz Yisrael and to Yerushalayim, take it from Miyad Mamish. The Rebbe continued from the matters which were introduced recently, is we see strange things, that there's some Yidden that are trying to guide to the Rebbe and tell him what to do. Always we knew that the Rebbe gave Yidden the Torah, and Torah is Meloshon HaYorah, and we follow the instructions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we know, Reishis Chachma, the first foundation in wisdom is Yiras Hashem, to be God-fearing. And now, Rachmana Litzlan, there is a Basar V'Dam that's coming and directing and telling the Rebbe what to do, and saying and proclaiming that in the recent generations, the attitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was a way of opposite, the contrary of Rachmanis. And also the contrary of being the source of Rachmanis, which this is the Rebbe's title. The Rebbe carries the title of being the Baal HaRachamim. And there's the famous Medrash, when a Medrash tells us, what does the Rebbe do? And Medrash responds that the Rebbe sits umezavig zivugim. He's making matches. What does this mean? That the Rebbe's inyan is to bring happiness to people. He's making matches which will turn into a binyan adei ad, and will lead to children, sons and daughters that will be involved in Torah and mitzvahs. And ultimately, the Rebbe will take us all out of Golas, as the pasuk says, Meheiro Yishama, which is an expression which we say in the brachas of Sheva brachas, Meheiro Yishama, Ba'ora Yehuda uvechutzis Yerushalayim. Which means that what is the Rebbe really involved in? The Rebbe is the source of all good, of all rachamim, and what he's trying to bring to Yidden is simcha, joy, and happiness. This is what the Rebbe brings to Yidden. So here, an individual gets up and says that in the recent generations, what is the Rebbe involved in concepts which are the opposite of schus and rachmanis for Yidden. And therefore, our generation, chas v'shalom, is not worthy of Geula. And as explained earlier, this is something which cannot be said, because Yankov Avinu loy meis, and what is the indication on it? Ma zaroi b'chayim, afu b'chayim, and Yidden are always b'chayim. Yidden are always living. Why? Because Yidden are always tied with Torah, which Torah is Torah's chayim, a Torah of life. So therefore, this brings out that afu b'chayim, that Yankov is also alive. And as we spoke earlier, how the true desire of each and every Yid is to be connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as it's known, what Chazal tell us, that before Neshama comes down onto this world, Mashbi'in Oisei Tehi Tzadik, the Neshama goes under oath to be a Tzadik. And the Tzemach Tzedek teaches, not only does it mean that the Neshama goes under the oath to be a Tzadik, but as Meloshen Soiva, the Neshama becomes full with strength to be able to hold out the Avodah of being a Tzadik here in this world. There are Yidden that are lacking something in the way they are acting. This is because the problems of Golus and lack of Gashmias, and that is why we are demanding from the Rebishter that the Rebishter should give us all our Gashmiastic needs, and we shouldn't be lacking anything. And this request is a legitimate request, says the Rebbe. And as the Rambam says, that the whole Inyan of Schar, the Gashmiastic rewards, the Yehudim Gashmiim, which a Yid gets for observing Torah mitzvahs, that is not the true reward which we are getting for Torah mitzvahs. That is only that a Yid is put into convenient circumstances so that he should be able to observe all of Torah mitzvahs. And the order in Geula will be, as we say every day in Tachnun. We say in Tachnun, we conclude the Tachnun with two psukim. Pedei elikim es Yisrael mekol tzoroisav, which this is one pasuk before the last, which actually this entire kapitel which we say in Tachnun is all kapitel Chaf Hey and Tilim. Then we find that there's one pasuk added, which is taken from elsewhere, which is taken from kapitel Kuf Lamed and Tilim. Vehu yiftes Yisrael mekol avenoisav. This is not part of this kapitel. This is added from kapitel Kuf Lamed. What does this mean? That how will the Rebishter take us out of Golas? That the Rebishter committed himself. That the first thing that he will do is Pedei elikim es Yisrael mekol tzoroisav. He will take Yidden out of all their tzaras. And what is the primary tzara which we are in? That is Golas. There's still Averis, there's still Avoinos, and we're saying Avoinos, and Avoin means not a sin which was done unintentionally, but it means a sin which was done intentionally. And nonetheless, we say that the Rebishter, Yiftes Yisrael, he will bail us out from all of our sins. What does that mean, that he will bail us out from our sins? He will take the Averis, he will take the Avonis to him, and he will give them back to us. But give them back to us in what way? That from these Averis that we did intentionally, they will be converted into Averis of Shoigeg, unintentionally, until ultimately they will be turned into mitzvahs, they will be turned into Zachias. The obligation of a Yid is that a Yid has to act in accordance to Shulchan Aruch. Sai, all the details which are written in Shulchan Aruch. And what is, as we mentioned earlier, the addition of the Ramah on the Shulchan Aruch, that is called the tablecloth on the Shulchan, which was edited by the Beis Yosef. So how does the Ramah conclude the Shulchan Aruch? He concludes the Shulchan Aruch, V'toiv leiv mishte tomit. What is the obligation of a Yid? The obligation of a Yid is to be involved. A good-hearted person is involved in mishte, in a feast constantly. And that means that by Yidden, it has to be constantly simchas. There'll be simchas of brisen, simchas of chasanes, and this is what a Yid has to be involved in. And as he uses the expression tomid, toiv leiv mishte tomid, constantly a Yid has to be involved in joy, in matters of joy and matters of happiness. And this is what he begins the Shulchan Aruch with, which Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, also an expression of tomid. The quotation of Yehuda ben Taima, that a Yid's obligation is to do the will and desire of Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven, and not the will of any Basar V'Dam. And when we're talking of a Yid being involved in matters of happiness, we also have to be happy for the fact that recently tens and thousands of Yidden have gotten close to Torah mitzvahs. And all of those that are talking these kind of strange and awkward words which we're bringing out, they were standing by the side and had no shaykhs to bring in close all these Eden to the Rebbe and to Torah. Even though it is known what Rabbi Akiva says. We know the general rule that kul hu alibi de Rabbi Akiva. We all follow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. That v'ahavta l'reyacho kamoicha, that is the foundation of Torah. And not chas v'shalom to bring out on Yidden the opposite of merit, as it is known regarding Yeshaya Hanavi. That Yeshaya Hanavi expressed himself on Yidden. Kizdoim hoyinu la'amoira daminu. That Yidden are compared to Zdoim and Amoira. And this brought out tremendous response from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Al tiftach peh l'satan, that a person should never open his mouth to speak up against Yidden. And where do we derive it from? We derive it from this pasuk. Why did Yeshaya say it? Yeshaya was such a great Navi. He was worthy of seeing the Merkava, and it's brought out the advantages from Yeshaya over Yecheskel, that Yeshaya is compared to not to a villager that came to the capital, but to a person who lives in an urban city that comes into the capital, who looks things at a much broader way. And nonetheless, how does it come to Yeshaya that Yeshaya should talk that way about Yidden? So Yeshaya sacrificed himself. Why did Yeshaya sacrifice himself to speak that way? Because he wanted to bring out, to lead to it, to bring out this concept, al tiftach peh l'satan, that we should not open a mouth to talk in a derogatory way on Yidden. Even though Chazal tell us that the Rebbe extends his anger, but nonetheless, this applies to before the time of Golus, and before we went through so much in Golus. However, now that we've gone through so much, we cannot come out and say, Rachmana litzlan, that our generation isn't worthy of Gula, and that the Rebbe is involved in Inyanim, which are the opposite of good for Yidden. On the contrary, Yidden in our generation are revealing their true and inner desire. And what is their true and inner desire? To get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And a Yid can get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu instantly. And by doing so, he will accomplish that a minute less the Shechina will be in Golas, because the Rebbe is together with Yidden in Golas. Especially the year which we are in. We're in the year of Vayechi Shnas Niflois Arenu, which Niflois are even greater than Nisim. Last year it was only an Inyan of Nisim. This year it is an Inyan of Niflois, which is yet greater, wonders. And we will be Zeiche to the ultimate chasana and marriage, and that is the chasana of Yidden and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even though the Gemara says that the Psula, the Kala, is given 12 months to the chasana. However, these 12 months we already went through, that we passed already. And now we are up to the moment of Geula, Arenu Niflois, which this will be brought out through the Geula HaMitis V'Ashleima. And especially that we said in davening already, we said 3 times already today, V'sechzeno Einenu B'shuvcha L'tziyim Berachamim. And now, we said it in 3 tefillas of Shabbos, and now we're going to say the 4th tefillah, which this will bring closer the Geula. Chazal used the expression, in Gemara we find it, thousands of years ago. Kolu kol hakitzin. All the set times for Mashiach to come have already passed. And Adayin lo iba. And now it is more so that the Rebbe will hasten the Geula. The Rebbe is the Baal HaRachmim. And he will bring to it and see to it that Yidden will have only matters of simcha, only matters of happiness, and all of this will lead to the great chasana, the chasana which will take place between Yidden and the Rebbe. And then we will have all 5 voices of simcha, all the chamisha koilos, kol chasan, v'kol kalo, kol sosan, v'kol simcha. And the Geula will be in a final way, it'll be a final Geula, and together with the Geula comes the Kitzu V'Rananu Sheikh Neyafa, together with the Sidei Reinu, and together with David Malka Meshicha, and we will all go together to Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. After the Rebbe spoke the Sikha about the major chasana, which will take place between the Rebbeishter and Yidden, the Rebbe said there are those that are getting married this week. So they too, let them say, a Freilich El HaChaim, and all of this should come together with a Freilich Nigen. A gute Woche.